Hello, my friends. Welcome back. We are going to keep reading The Green Glass Sea together. So far we have been getting to know some of the characters and getting to know what it's like living on the hill. We know Dewey is kind of not really accepted by the other kids. They think she's weird. She likes to go find things in the dump to keep building and creating new things. And Suze, kind of our other main character, is also not really accepted by the other kids, but in a different way. She really wants to fit in and she keeps trying to play with the other girls, but they just don't like her. They're not into the same things, and she keeps trying to make them like her, but it keeps not really going well for her. But they both have really good relationships with their fathers and love to talk about science and math and that kind of stuff with them. So we are going to pick back up with chapter 6, which is called A Calculated Meal. Fuller Lodge was the center of social life on the hill, and the tallest building, 3 stories of big pine logs like giant forest columns with windows in between. Philip Gordon stopped to knock the dead ashes out of his pipe against the big stone steps of the front porch before replacing the briar in his shirt pocket. "Shall we?" he said. He held the left-hand door open for her, and they went inside. The dining room in the lodge was one of Suze's favorite places inside the hill. It was a long room with log column walls hung with bright patterned Navajo rugs. Balconies ran along both sides. At one end stood a big stone fireplace with an elk head mounted over it. On this hot summer night, all the windows were open to catch any breeze. With wooden walls and wooden floors and more than 100 people all talking and laughing and eating, it was very noisy. Waitresses in white uniforms bustled among the tables, bringing food and clearing away plates. "Over here, Phil," called a man in a plaid shirt, the sleeves rolled up past his elbows. Her father put his hand on her back and steered her over to a table near the far wall. He sat down across from her. "Where's Terry?" asked the other man. He had an accent, and it sounded like "Where's Terry?" "Still in her lab. You know how it is, Hans." "We all put in our time," the man said, shaking his head. "And you, Liebchen, how are you tonight?" "Fine, Mr. Beth," Suze said. She was pleased that she remembered to pronounce his name the way it wasn't spelled. Beta. Sorry. He nodded and glanced down at the newspaper folded by his plate. "Still, we're getting there, and maybe we won't need to. The Allies are just outside Paris. It won't be long." "Good news," agreed his father, "but there's still Japan. We might need it there." Suze thought it was probably the gadget gun, but she knew better than to ask. The waitress came over and her father ordered a steak, medium rare, and coffee. Suze had the same thing, except with milk. She played with her fork, trying to balance it on the rim of her glass, while the men talked about other things she didn't understand, mostly work. At the other end of the table, a man and a woman she didn't know were talking in a language she didn't understand at all. Suze was sorry she hadn't brought Wonder Woman with her. She had just gotten to the part where Wonder Woman found the hideout of the bad guy, a Nazi mad scientist who was going to blow up the world. You knew he was a scientist because he wore a long white coat and had a pointy beard and thick glasses. She looked around the room and thought about that. Just about everyone she could see, every man at least, was some kind of scientist in real life, but nobody, not one of them, looked like the one in the comic. No white coats, just t-shirts and plaid shirts and blue jeans. A couple of people had mustaches, but no beards. A lot of them did wear glasses, though. The steaks came with yellow corn on the cob, glistening with butter, and a baked potato with steam that smelled like edible laundry when she smushed it open with her fingers. The men kept talking, but Suze didn't mind much now that there was food. Dessert was butterscotch pudding. It was a very satisfying texture to cut because it made nice, clean shapes, and Suze was slicing tawny orange arcs out of its slightly rubbery surface with her spoon when she saw her mother walk into the room. She was with 3 men, and they were all talking and shaking their heads as if they were arguing, but they were smiling, not mad. When she spotted Suze, she waved and threaded her way through the maze of tables. Dr. Marjorie Gordon, Terry, an athletic-looking woman in gray shorts, had short honey-brown hair and blue eyes. She was very tan, with crinkly lines at the corners of her eyes when she smiled. A pair of tortoiseshell reading glasses perched just above her forehead. Like most of the women on the hill, she wore no makeup. Her only jewelry was a gold wedding ring and a Timex watch with a brown leather band. "Hi, sweetie," she said to Suze. "Coffee, cream," she said to the waitress. She gave Suze a quick kiss on the temple and sat down in the empty chair next to her, then reached across the table and squeezed her husband's hand. "How was your day?" she asked. "Not bad," he said. "I talked to Cyril about the procurement schedule for 49. I had lunch with some of the ex-boys. We started looking at the diffusion data. Nothing really new. How was yours?" She made a face. "Tedious. One of the IBMs broke down again, and we lost half a day's calculations. Dick Feynman got it up and running, thank God, but not until almost 4. I managed to get some preliminary results, but they weren't at all what I was hoping." She added a long stream of cream to her coffee and stirred. "Are you going back tonight?" he asked. She shook her head. "I'm too tired to think straight. Besides, the computers have gone home for the night. I'll tackle it fresh in the morning." As far as Suze was concerned, they were both talking in code. except she knew the computers were the women who ran the big adding machines. She thought about asking what they were talking about, but they wouldn't tell her, and it would probably be boring even if she understood. Who were those guys you came in with? She asked instead. Do you work with them? 2 of them. The bald one is in my singing group. Oh, she snapped her fingers. That reminds me. We changed our rehearsal time for the show tomorrow night. I need to find Jimmy, our tenor, and let him know. Glorious Irish voice. He's got to be there, or we're sunk. She looked around the room. I don't see him, she said after a minute. Maybe I'll run by his place later on the way home and let him know. She shook her head. Sometimes it's darn inconvenient with no phones up here. What are you going to sing? Asked Suze. Around the house, her mother sang along with the radio, and she used to sing her lullabies when she was little, but neither of them seemed like the kind of songs you would do for an audience. Schubert, mostly. Edward Teller's going to play piano for us, she said. Imagine that. Oh, said Suze. Classical stuff, not real songs. She sat and ate her pudding in tiny bites, trying to make it last, trying to make circles with secret pies in them, while her mother ate and her father had another cup of coffee. They were talking about grown-up things again. Not work, but groceries and drinks, and did they want to have dinner with so-and-so? It was just as boring. Oh, say, what do you think of this? Her father asked, showing his wife what he'd written on his wrist. She squinted, pulled her glasses down onto her nose, and said, Nice. Then they were both talking in science code again, talking really fast and smiling at each other. They looked like they were having fun. A minute later, her mother grabbed a paper napkin and began scribbling numbers and Greek things on it. Okay, but if lambda is the rate of beta decay, she said at one point, and Philip nodded, and then said, Oh! He grabbed the mechanical pencil from her hand and scribbled more. Is that Greek too? Suze asked. He didn't look up. Yes, not now, he said, continued to write. Suze slumped back in her chair. Right then, it seemed like her parents were from another planet, one that she would never be able to visit. She thought wistfully about Wonder Woman back on the kitchen table. A few minutes later, her father folded up the napkin and put it in his pocket. This could be good, he said, smiling at his wife. I'm going to go run it by Cyril. He stood, patted Suze on the cheek without really looking at her, and walked out of the dining room. Suze watched him go. Is Daddy going back to work? Just for an hour or 2. Her mother finished her coffee. Oh, she would be in bed by then. Suze kicked the rung of the chair. What's wrong? Daddy was going to teach me the Greek alphabet after dinner. Greek? Her mother raised one eyebrow. How come? So I'll be able to talk in math, Suze said, like you two do. She bounced her sneaker off the rung of her chair again. Oh, I see, said her mother. She tapped her fingers on the table. Well, tell you what, sweetie, why don't you come along with me to Jimmy's place? Then, when we get home, you and I can sit down, and I'll write that whole alphabet out for you. She touched Suze's face with the back of her hand and smiled. That way, if Daddy gets some time, you can surprise him with how much you already know. She winked and stood up. Deal? Deal, said Suze, and was glad for once that her mother was a scientist, too. Chapter 7, Morganville. You know, said Suze's mother as they walked out of the lodge, I haven't taken my day off this month. What do you say the 2 of us go down to Santa Fe Wednesday afternoon? School starts the week after, and you'll need supplies. Okay, Suze said, smiling. Her grandfather owned a stationery store in Berkeley, and she loved getting new pencils and paper, loved the smell of pencil shavings curling down from the sharpener, and the way a needle-sharp new point made black lines as thin as thread on a blank white page. We'll make a day of it, you and I. Lunch at the Woolworths counter, shopping, the whole shebang. Okay, said Suze with even more enthusiasm. The Woolworths here served chili over an opened-up bag of Fritos, which she thought was even better than steak. At the end of Bathtub Row, Suze turned left and started across the road to the row of apartment buildings. Her mother reached out and tapped her on the arm. This way, she said, pointing off to the right. Your friend lives in Morganville? Suze asked. Unfortunately. He was in the men's dorm when he first got here. Then his daughter came from back east sometime last winter. He said they spent 2 months in a trailer while the Morgans were being built. So, I guess a duplex is a step up. Maybe, Suze said skeptically. Everyone knew which places to live were the best. Bathtub Row, of course, and then the Sunts, the apartment where they lived. There were a lot of Sunts, but not enough, because more people kept moving to the hill. So the army had built the Morgans, which nobody liked. But even they beat living in a trailer. Ick, Suze said a minute later. The Sunts had been built among a few trees, against the slope of the hillside. But in Morganville, the one-story barracks-like buildings were lined up in straight rows on the bare, flat ground. And they were just boxes. No porches or balconies or anything. It looked like a prison camp, she thought. Her mother made a face. Yup, makes our place seem like a palace, doesn't it? She dropped her cigarette in the dirt and ground it out with the toe of her moccasin. 3rd row, 2nd building, she said. They walked over, and she stopped in front of one of the identical boxes. One doorstep was surrounded by cactus plants and colorful clay pots. The door to the other was open, and through the screen, Suze could hear a man laugh and then a child's giggle. Jimmy, her mother called. The laughter continued for a moment, then faded. and half a minute later, a dark-haired man came to the door. He was barefoot, in a t-shirt tucked into a pair of khaki shorts with lots of pockets, like Boy Scout shorts. He held a red-striped dishcloth in one hand. "Hey, Terry," he said with a big smile. "We just finished supper. It's my night for dishes." He opened the door. "Your cactus garden?" she asked. "Nope, the neighbor's. Juanita Sandoval's got a green thumb. Nice to have some color around here, too, let me tell you. Come on in." The kitchen was tiny, barely big enough for them to all stand in at once. The table was a wide counter with a bench, built into the wall, and a corner cupboard displayed bright-colored dishes and white china mugs. At the side of the sink, a wooden dish rack held 2 plates, 2 forks, and a glass tumbler, all neatly aligned. He folded the dishcloth and laid it next to the rack. "We don't get company very often. Let's go into the living room." He motioned them through a doorway with no door. The living room was not much bigger. It was less than half the size of theirs, Suze thought, with no fireplace. All the furniture was Army issue, except for some bright watercolor paintings on the wall. Across a low coffee table covered with some papers and a slide rule, 2 identical wooden chairs with leather seats faced a couch with green striped cushions. She was glad her parents had shipped their real furniture out here. The man named Jimmy leaned against the doorframe. "Have a seat. You want a Coke or a real drink? I heard you had a major snafu with the IBMs today." Suze's mother smiled. "Maybe just a little one. We can't stay long." She sat down on the couch. "You want a Coke, Suze?" Suze shrugged. "I guess so." "Susan," her mother said in her young lady tone of voice. "What?" Suze slumped down on the other end of the couch. Yes, please." "Be right back," said Jimmy. He returned in a minute with a bottle of Coke and 2 squat glasses with ice and an inch of brown liquid. He handed them their drinks, then perched on the arm of the chair across from them. Suze thought he looked kind of like an elf. Her mother took a sip of the drink. "Oh, God, Jimmy, it's Bushmills. How heavenly." "I brought it back from Albuquerque," he said with a grin. "I just can't stand rum, and that's all the Santa Fe store seems to be able to get." He swirled his glass and the ice cubes rattled. "So what brings you to my neighborhood?" "Kay had to reschedule tomorrow's rehearsal, an hour earlier, just as soon as the siren sounds," Terry Gordon said. "No problem. I'll just take my good shirt to the lab in the morning. Saves me the trouble of coming all the way back over here to change." Suze drank her Coke and tried to read what was on the papers at the coffee table. They were upside down from where she was sitting, covered with drawings and penciled numbers and words, but big, like a kid's writing, so she was pretty sure they weren't top secret. She leaned over a little more and tilted her head. "Easier to read them if you just turn them around," said Jimmy. He reached over and rotated the stack of papers so it faced Suze. "Suze," said her mother, "it's not polite to—" "That's okay," Jimmy said, holding up his hand. "The Army won't let me keep a diary, and any eyes-only documents are back in my office. It's just a little bit of calculus. My daughter's taking apart a broken clock, and I thought it would help her understand the gear ratios. She's picking it up pretty fast, too." He turned to Suze. "Do you like math?" Suze shook her head. "Not really," she said, "but I learned about pi tonight. I like drawing circles. She heard a door open down the short hallway to the right of Jimmy's chair. "Papa," said an excited voice coming closer. "I think I figured it out. When the biggest gear—" A small, curly-haired girl appeared in the doorway, wearing a sleeveless army green GI undershirt that came down below her knees. She stopped in mid-sentence when she saw there were other people in the room. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said. "It's okay, Dews." Jimmy Kerrigan reached over and put his arm around his daughter's waist. "This is my friend Terry Gordon and her daughter Susan. Suze. Terry's in the chorus with me." "Hello," said Dewey to Suze's mother. A brief pause. "Hi, Suze." "Hi." A longer pause. "Dewey." "You girls know each other?" asked Suze's mother. The 2 girls exchanged glances. Neither spoke. Finally, Dewey said, "Sort of." She stepped in closer to her father. Suze sat with her mouth open. This was Dewey Kerrigan's house? She'd been sitting on Screwy Dewey's couch? She squirmed and moved her bare legs so only the fabric of her shorts was actually touching the cushions. "So what did you figure out, Dews?" asked Jimmy after a few moments, breaking the silence that now seemed to fill the room. "Just the gears," Dewey said. "I'll show you after your company's gone." She slipped out of his arm. "It was nice to meet you, Mrs. Gordon," she said. She turned and walked a few steps down the hallway and back into an unseen bedroom. Suze heard the door shut with a soft click. "Oh dear," said Suze's mother. She looked at her watch. "I guess we ought to get going." She drained the last bit of her drink and stood up. "Thanks for the whiskey, Jimmy. I'll see you tomorrow night." She took 2 steps across the room and rested a hand briefly on his shoulder. "Looks like someone else needs you right now. Gear ratios, huh?" She shook her head, but was smiling. "You should see her room," he said. "It looks like Rube Goldberg set up an engineering lab in there." He lowered his voice. "I'm getting her an erector set for her birthday. It'll be fun to see what she does with motors." "My guess is you'll have your hands full." "Probably." Jimmy Kerrigan looked fondly toward the bedroom. "It hasn't been easy, just the 2 of us. I've been away so much, and she's a smart kid, a smart girl kid to boot, always asking questions. I'm afraid not many of her teachers could handle that. So this is heaven for her. Everywhere we go, there's one of the best science minds in the world. Nobel Prize winners just walking down the street. The other night we stopped to chat, and she and Fermi spent 15 minutes talking about why candle flames are blue. Enrico Fermi. He took the glass from Terry's hand. I've never seen her happier. I think a lot of that is having you around, too, Suze's mother said with a smile. And speaking of curious girls, I promised to introduce mine to some Greek, right? She looked over at Suze and raised an eyebrow. I'm coming. Suze put down her Coke bottle and stood up quickly. Thank you for the Coke, Mr. Kerrigan, she said, without being asked. Jimmy, please, he said, and any time. He opened the screen door, holding it for them as they walked out into the late summer twilight. The western sky was wiped with wisps of orange, and the mountains were dusky gray silhouettes. Suze could smell spices from someone's dinner through an open window. Dewey seems like an interesting girl, said her mother as they walked past the houses of Bathtub Row. Lamps in the windows cast rectangles of yellow light onto the dirt at their feet. Suze couldn't think of anything safe to say, so she nodded to show she was listening. Maybe you could ask her to come over and play some afternoon. Or do homework, her mother said. Once school starts, I mean. Maybe I will, Suze said, lying. She kicked a pebble with her foot, skittering it off to some pine needles. And maybe pigs will learn to fly. Alright, and that is where we're going to stop for today. So it seems like Dewey and Suze, even though both of them have a hard time being accepted by the other kids at school, don't really have too much chance of becoming good friends. They seem to have something against each other. So we are going to pick back up tomorrow with more, and it is jumping ahead in time again at that point. So can't wait to read with you guys. Make sure you stay tuned for tomorrow's video, and we will keep reading The Green Glass Sea. Bye!